Okay, great. And so with that, I would like to introduce our speaker. So Tedde leads the ACLU of Northern California's deepening Indigenous justice work, focusing on building mutual and meaningful relationships and centering Indigenous voices and worldviews in ACLU Northern California's work. Before that, she was the ACLU Northern California's first investigator focused on developing impact litigation to defend and advance immigrants' rights. Prior to joining the ACLU, Tedde led advocacy and organizing efforts to defend the basic rights of asylum seekers and detained immigrants at the US-Mexico border, and has spent years as well in El Salvador doing amazing work. Today, Tedde is a board member of the Alliance for Felix Cove, longtime supporter of Voices on the Border, a grassroots organization standing in solidarity with the people of El Salvador, and along with her dog, loves taking advantage of the diverse and beautiful green spaces throughout the Bay Area. So with Tedde, I will go ahead and hand it over to you to begin your presentation.
Awesome, thank you. Good evening, everyone. My name is Tedde. It's a pleasure to be here, introduce myself in my family's ancestral language, Dene or Navajo. Excited to be here and thank you for the invitation. And kind of before I dive into the work, I just wanted to introduce myself a little bit of the why I'm here, why I do this work, and then also like we're human beings also before we are the work that you do. And can you all hear me or should I pause?
We can hear you fine, just for some reason, I don't see you.
Awesome. I will also say this is my first like actual hybrid event, so I'm excited to see how this works. I'm used to basically just being on Zoom.
There we go. You're good.
Awesome. So I grew up in the Pacific Northwest, which for folks who know is very far from the Navajo Nation. And that is in many ways a direct result of federal policies, including boarding schools and forced relocation. Where I grew up, we didn't really learn about Native people or Indigenous people or tribes. We played a lot of Oregon Trail, which really was not very educational and was focused on pioneers in little wagons. I didn't learn any of my native language until I was in my 30s and I went to grad school on the East Coast. How do I advance slides? These are two of the three best things in my life. That's my nephew and one of my two nieces. They're products of Santa Clara, which both my brother-in-law and my sister are alums of. So I have Santa Clara to thank for them. Lots of hiking in the East Bay with my dog. During the pandemic, I helped unionize staff at the ACLU, which is maybe one of the coolest things I've ever done. And my sister, who is mean, made me run a bunch of half marathons with her, which I never imagined is a thing that I would say. So that's just a little about me. So I'm going to talk some about the ACLU and our Indigenous justice work, and then focus on some of our current campaigns. So the ACLU of Northern California is dedicated to, well, you all know, what the ACLU does. And so I'm going to skip this one actually and just talk about why Indigenous justice at the ACLU. Indigenous people are often, if not always, almost always, left out of our national conversations, including those about social justice and civil liberties. As a general population, Native American and Black Americans hold up almost all of the worst societal indicators and outcomes. But policy responses and the public narrative very infrequently take Indigenous people and Indigenous voices into account. So kind of from my perspective, and I think the growing perspective at the ACLU, is either we're choosing to do Indigenous work and center Indigenous people in that work, or we're contributing to historic erasure and making Indigenous people further invisible. These are just some of the guiding principles of Indigenous work at the ACLU that were created by a nationwide group of Indigenous staff, especially focusing on following the lead of Native people and moving at the pace of relationship. It's really important as we build out our Indigenous justice work that we're focused on building relationships, that we're focused on following the lead of Indigenous people, honoring Indigenous voices and values, and continuing to kind of be in reflection with ourselves and in conversation with our partners about whether we're really living up to those values, or are we trampling over people or kind of putting our priorities before what communities and tribes and people need. There has been so much broken trust and so much extraction from tribal communities, so much going in, taking advantage, taking out and not giving back, that really focusing on strengthening relationships is so important. And we're also learning and trying to be humble as we do this work about how we do it and how we communicate about it. And I will just say that in many ways, Indigenous existence is a challenge to the colonial settler state, right? Like Native people aren't supposed to be here anymore. And so the stories that people share with us, the time that people give us to share those stories are really gifts, and it's incumbent upon us to honor those and walk alongside people, which isn't always easy. So we always try to start kind of at the beginning, and some of this might be super repetitive for many of you in the room and on Zoom, but we also recognize that colonial settler policies and practices have been really effective. And so there's so much knowledge that we don't have access to. The level of intentional kind of ignorance in the public is very deep. So we always want to just kind of start with some really basic information. And I apologize if you're like, yes, thank you, we know, we're paying attention. California is home to the largest Native American population in the nation, and has some of the cities with the largest urban Indian populations, including here in the Bay Area. Santa Rosa, Sacramento, LA has a huge urban Indian population. There are over 100 federally recognized tribes in California, and somewhere between 50 and 70 tribes without federal recognition. And there are 100 reservations and rancherias, so tribal lands in California. It's an incredibly diverse community, each tribe and rancheria with its own history, tradition, and culture. There are dozens of native languages spoken throughout the state. Not for lack of trying, as I said before, and we can't talk about our Indigenous justice work today without putting it in its historic and current context. So just some background. California as a state was founded on the forced removal, enslavement, and genocide of Indigenous peoples. The state of California and federal governments spent more than $1.7 million in 1850s dollars on murderous campaigns against California Indians. The state paid militias and paid bounty hunters for the scalps of California Indians. We know that at least 20,000 California Indians worked in varied forms of bondage. So there was legalized slavery in the state of California. And throughout the history of the state, dozens of tribes were terminated by the federal government. So the US kept a lot of land, but didn't live up to any of the promises that it agreed to in treaties. And then just kind of a few other data points about how history continues today. It just looks a little bit different. The rates of missing and murdered Indigenous women are at epidemic and crisis levels, and Native women and girls experience incredibly high rates of violence and sexual violence. Native Americans are incarcerated at higher rates and face higher rates of police brutality than any other racial group. So with that that background, doing a hard pivot now to the ways in which Indigenous communities are thriving and are really resilient and are leading efforts across all kinds of different issues. And so the first thing I'm going to talk about work that the ACLU is really lucky to be able to support is the Protect Juristac campaign. And I'm hoping that this works because Chairman Valentin Lopez speaks more eloquently about the issues that his tribe and his people are facing than any of us ever could. So I'm hoping to be able to share just about 30 seconds about this issue in his voice.
Our creation story tells us.
And I'm sure that that is not working.
We can hear it, we can't see it.
Oh, good. Well, that is actually probably better than I had hoped for. Okay.
Creators
Now?
specifically picked.
Yes, we can.
Okay, perfect.
Our creation story tells us creators specifically picked our people to care for the lands of our territory, which Creator defined for us. What was most important is that we maintain the land as sacred. Juristac is the most sacred site of our tribal territory. My name is Valentin Lopez, and I'm the chairman of the Amah Mutsun Tribal Band. And our tribe is comprised of the descendants of the indigenous peoples that were taken to Mission San Juan Bautista in Santa Cruz.
So that's just a little in Chairman Lopez's voice. As he said, Juristac is in the heart of the Amah Mutsun's ancestral lands. It's their spiritual home, and since time immemorial, the Amah Mutsun lived near and held sacred ceremonies at Juristac. It's one of their only remaining sacred sites that hasn't been developed or destroyed. This is the area where Juristac is located. The private company that currently holds the land is seeking permits from the County of Santa Clara to turn the site into an open pit gravel and sand mine. It would last for 30 years, basically carve out entire sides of the mountain, pump a ton of water, and you all know we're in serious drought year after year in this state, and irreparably damage Juristac and replace these sacred hills and ceremonial sites with empty craters. The company has said that they'll, after 30 years, kind of replace Juristac and bring it back, but you can't, once you've desecrated a site like that, you can't simply bring it back. This is really a clear example of how settler colonialism is an ongoing process. The destruction of Juristac wouldn't just be the destruction of the Amah Mutsun sacred site today, but a continuation of the intended genocide of these people. For the Amah Mutsun specifically, it's gone from being enslaved in the missions to working almost as slave labor at Mexican ranches, to facing California statehood, and now to this newest face or manifestation of destruction. The Amah Mutsun themselves today are in some ways a diaspora. They remain separated from much of their ancestral lands. Many tribal members live out in Gilroy or even further out in the Central Valley because the cost of living in the Bay Area, you all know, is so high that it's out of reach for them. So not only are they displaced from their lands in that way, but then facing this threat of their ancestral lands being destroyed. And that's in the context of being peoples who survived the California mission system, including the mission at Santa Clara. The missions were brutal, and actually the descendants of the California indigenous people who were taken to Mission San Juan Bautista, which is a little bit further south of you. By 1833, there have been a total of 3,396 baptisms at Mission San Juan Bautista, 858 marriages, and over 19,000 deaths of California Indians. So just the sheer impact, the magnitude that the missions had on people is absolutely incredible. And I was kind of poking around. I was really curious how Santa Clara talks about the history of the mission. And I should have just put this in the slide because now I can't find it. So maybe I should come back to it. But I mean, many of you are on your devices, so you could also just like poke around and look. It was really interesting to me though to look at Santa Clara's website. And I know, I went to a Jesuit university also, and so the church itself, the mission is kind of a central part of the identity of these universities. But I was really struck by the information that the university shares. There's basically like this one paragraph about the treatment of Indigenous people at missions. And what really stuck out to me is quoting from the website here. Sadly, historical accounts reveal harsh punishments by modern standards of withholding food, corporal punishments, and imprisonment for wayward converts. The parenthetical by modern standards really jumped out to me, as if like at the time, it would be okay to beat people for speaking their native languages, or to withhold food from people for engaging in traditional practices. So yes, I agree with the chat. It is very concerning how little is disclosed, and like really how it seems like the university is dealing with that history. And something else that's really important about the lived experience of the Amah Mutsun is that they're one of over 70 tribes about 70 tribes in California without federal recognition. So the Amah Mutsun actually descend from one of the tribes, do not descend from one of the tribes that had these broken treaties. But another thing that we don't ever learn about or hear about is the federal government signed 18 treaties where tribes in California ceded land in exchange for rights and responsibilities and guarantees from the federal government. And the California elite went to the Senate and lobbied for those treaties not to be ratified. They were placed under seal, and tribes were kind of in the eyes of the state and federal government became non-existent. And that has lack of recognition has a huge impact on tribes. They can't own land. All of the rights that the federal government promised to Indigenous people upon signing these treaties are withheld from them. So healthcare and education, it's really an ongoing tragedy. Okay, so against all of that backdrop, turning this site into a mine not only would destroy the Amah Mutsun's only remaining sacred site, but also hundreds of acres of wildlife habitat, including a really important wildlife corridor, and the California tiger salamander and California red-legged frog, which are also threatened species, destroy dozens of acres of woodlands and streams and grasslands, and that the impact of the massive construction trucks driving through would also cause a lot of air pollution in the area. And there are conservation agencies and organizations who want to work with the Amah Mutsun to purchase to reclaim this land if the development company would put it up for sale. So the Protect Juristac campaign itself has kind of two overarching goals. The most immediate one is to ensure that the Santa Clara County Board of Supervisors deny a permit for the proposed quarry project, the proposed mine, which is called Sargent Ranch. And the longer term and really the central goal is to protect Juristac in perpetuity, which is to return it to the stewardship of the Amah Mutsun people. Really important that this work is being led by the Amah Mutsun tribe and the Amah Mutsun Land Trust with the support of allies and accomplices. A lot of the work around cultural revivance, around language, teaching, and tradition is on the land. So going to the land and gathering traditional items and engaging in traditional ecological knowledge, revitalizing relationship to the land, all of that as a way to learn about who you are as an Amah Mutsun person. So you have to be able to access the land to do all of those things. And there's very active youth in this process. So the work itself of the Protect Juristac campaign, I just got an email today that there are over 85 individuals and organizations that are part of the coalition, environmental and conservation groups, other tribally led organizations, student and community groups, faith-based groups, activist groups, all kinds of people are a part of the coalition. It's centered on advocacy work, a lot of individual outreach to elected officials, and a lot of education, right? So many people just have no idea in our area that there are still Native American peoples in California, much less that there are thriving tribes who are trying to protect and regain access to their ancestral lands. And this has started, so right now, the development company is seeking to get a permit for this project from the County of Santa Clara. They have to go through an environmental impact report process. A draft of that will be released. It was supposed to be released in 2019. So there have been a few delays, but at some point, an environmental impact report will be released. There'll be a public comment period, a final report will be released, and then the county will vote up or down on the permit. So it's been a long road of trying to build political will and public will to oppose this mining project. So the coalition has gone to different city councils and different kind of local governing bodies to get them to pass resolutions calling on the County of Santa Clara to oppose the mine and deny the permit. So that started in Morgan Hill, and then Santa Clara, Santa Cruz have passed resolutions opposing the mining permit, as well as the Santa Clara Human Rights Commission. And for each of those, it's a series of approaching city council members, having educational meetings, drafting resolutions, turning people out to city council meetings, and then kind of answering questions. So it's a lot of behind the scenes work to educate and mobilize people and keep this issue in the media, keep the pressure up, especially sustained over 2.5 years in a pandemic has been a challenge. But keep the pressure up on the County of Santa Clara to deny this permit when the time comes. And so much public education, just sharing about the incredible work of the Amah Mutsun and then kind of the desperate need to protect this site. And there's a lot that we can all do, you know, as individuals, as law students, as associations, and so we'll come back to that at the end. I feel like I've been talking for forever, so I also want to pause if there are questions or to do kind of a time check.
Wow, does anyone have any questions for Tedde before we move forward? Tedde, I was wondering if there was any sense of how the Santa Clara County community might feel, or just where they are and how much support the Protect Juristac project or campaign has garnered amongst just local folks.
The campaign has a really fabulous website where they track like all of the statements of opposition and people who have signed on. There's actually a large group of faculty and students from Santa Clara University who signed a statement of opposition. I should have had that. I have it somewhere here, but and some public officials who have come out against the mine. A lot of a number of boards of supervisors haven't wanted to take a public position because they want to wait until the impact report comes out to then kind of read the impact report and take a position then. I think people are probably afraid that whatever the decision is, they're going to get sued, and so trying not to say anything publicly before then. Also, we're in the Bay Area and there's a lot of money and there's a lot of development and a lot of interest in development and building. And so there are a lot of counter arguments, including like, what about homelessness and housing? And like, we can't build more housing or like no one who needs offices, but we can't build and develop without the raw materials to do so. And instead of driving all the sand and gravel for Bay Area construction, quite a bit of it comes down from Canada. So and there is an argument that the environmental impact of bringing that from Canada is worse than the environmental impact of just having it right here in our own backyard. There are just a lot of counter arguments like that, a lot of counter arguments that just really demonstrate either lack of knowledge about or really just not caring about what this site means. So one of the things that the developers have said is that on the specific ceremonial sites where ceremonies were held, they won't mine there, which is just, it's such a misnomer to think that like there was just this like one little acre where the dance happened and none of the surrounding land or place mattered, or that you could desecrate like 98% of this place, but leave just enough for people to continue to practice ceremony and tradition. But those are kind of all the talking points that are out there in the public and that sound, especially when we have so little information and so like little exposure to these issues, that sound reasonable. So I don't think we have a sense really of how the Board of Supervisors is thinking about this. And because the draft environmental impact report has been delayed for so long, it's been continually hard to really get a sense of whether this is like really, really possible or unlikely. And so then just the more other opposition that there is, especially of other elected officials or other people, kind of, respected figures in the community, that really matters.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any questions? Yes.
I guess I'm just curious by whom the land is owned right now. Is it public property, or are there any movements for the Amah Mutsun peoples to gain land rights? Because I guess I probably don't have a deep enough understanding, but it sounds so wrong to have the city council decide over a matter which is deeply impacting their sacred lands.
Yes, I agree. I agree. It is privately held. So it was bought by a landholding developing company from San Diego, I believe, the Development Corporation of America, and they are seeking to get the mining permit and then sell it. And as a tribe without federal recognition, the Amah Mutsun tribe as a tribal government can't hold land. And they have created the Amah Mutsun Land Trust. So the Land Trust is a nonprofit organization, a 501c3, that can own land and can do all of these amazing things, including conservation efforts, including cultural teaching. They have really amazing youth programs and youth-led programs, language. The land trust model is one that has really kind of taken off, especially for tribes across the country without federal recognition, because as you know, the process is so broken at that level. It allows tribes to hold land legally and do a lot of other work. It's not the same as having that government to government sovereign relationship, but it is a really good alternative to get land back in the meantime.
Okay, thank you.
And so if the development company were to decide to do the right thing, or decide that the political pressure was just not worth it anymore, or decide that the delays in getting this permit weren't worth it, and just said, fine, we'll sell, the Amah Mutsun Land Trust has enough support and relationships with conservation organizations that there would be some mix of a conservation organization buying that property, and then either giving it back to the tribe or creating some kind of joint management or conservation or cultural easement, which would allow the tribe and tribal members access to the land.
That was one question I had. Like, are there other organizations that have been very helpful in this effort?
Yeah, so the coalition is broad and really strong. I mean, I would say keeping people together for 2.5 years over Zoom on an issue that kind of just like keeps getting punted down the road. The county has said that they're going to release the draft environmental impact report like every 2 months, and then just keeps delaying it. Unclear, and it seems like actually some of those delays are just legitimately like staffing capacity. But that's hard to keep people like motivated and engaged through all of that. So one of the kind of anchor organizations in the coalition, in addition to the tribe, is the Committee for Green Foothills. And I'll just plug them as a really awesome organization on the peninsula and the South Bay, who are conservation focused, but are really, really intentionally working with the Amah Mutsun and also with the Muwekma Ohlone tribe around not only conservation, but working with Indigenous people for that conservation and really allowing access to and leadership and stewardship of lands by Indigenous people. And then there are a lot of other smaller organizations who support the coalition as well. And I should say that the ACLU role is really in support of the work that's being led by the tribe and by other members. So we have a big name. People recognize the name of the ACLU. So we're able to get more people to join and educate others and raise awareness. One of the things that we have continuously done is send in letters of support to all of these different city councils or commissions, and then show up and give public comment, which in some ways being able to do that over Zoom is really helpful. Sometimes these public comment periods, I don't know how many of you have been to city council or board of supervisor meetings, but they can sometimes go, especially in a really populated urban place, they can go until 1 or 2 in the morning. And like if your agenda item doesn't come up until 1:30 in the morning, you're just sitting there waiting to give public comment. So it's been nice for us to be able to do that from our homes during the pandemic, but those are important ways, I think, for big organizations who want to support this work to be able to continue to show up and support their efforts.
Ted, could you tell us a little bit about, I know you mentioned you might be able to share with us a little bit about what's going on about the mission bell removal. And also just for reference, I put in the chat, sorry, I'm on Cassandra's computer, but I put in the chat an article about the Amah Mutsun tribe. I don't know if you saw that article in the New York Times recently. I don't know if there's any, also if you have any updates on that too, that would be great. If you happen to know.
Yes, that just came out like 2 days ago. So I'm going to put in the chat now also an article, an op-ed that was relatively recently placed by Chairman Lopez of the Amah Mutsun just a month ago about the mission bell removal campaign. It's one of those things that seems so obvious and people are really resistant to. So this is a fabulous, fabulous op-ed that kind of like just lays it all out. University of Santa Cruz took their mission bell down, I think 2 years ago now. And just last summer, the city of Santa Cruz took down a mission bell marker. The mission bells were rung. I was having a conversation with Mary Lopez Kiefer, who's the first deputy at the state attorney general's office to be the director of Native American affairs. She's an attorney, I believe, a Stanford grad, and from a tribe in Southern California. And I remember her explaining it to me as like the mission bells were rung to call mission Indians, as they were referred to, back to the missions from like slave work in the fields. And the mission bell was this reminder that you were property, and that like everything, all of your identity, your songs and your language and your tradition and your culture, your family, where you were from, none of that mattered. And like all of it was illegal and illegitimate. And there's so that like the physicality, the somatic experience of hearing the mission bell as a symbol of all of those things, that gets passed down from generation to generation. And so she was sharing that like even as a kid, sometimes they would hear the mission bells, and that would just be this really traumatic reminder of like everything that her people suffered and survived, which is incredible, but also that they suffered. And so like that's what the symbol of the mission bell is. And that's just, I think, really important to keep in mind, of like, they're not just a symbol of like a church or just a symbol, like they were actually created to drum up tourism along the El Camino Real, not even as something to commemorate the missions. So anyways, there are hundreds of these all over the state. And they really promote this like fake, romanticized vision of like what the missions were in the history of the state of California. And they also invisibilize the real history of what the missions were. So there are growing efforts to remove the mission bells. There's this really cool There's a website, Remove the Bells. There's a great children's book that they just published that is beautifully illustrated, that talks about the history of the bells and why they should come down. And I think the momentum is growing towards this. I think for most people, when you reach them with this information and with these stories, it does something to us, right? It's really impactful, and we can understand why like this symbol is harmful and painful to other people. There are also still a lot of people out there who are like, no, but this is my history, my culture, and who don't want to take the bells down. The city of Gilroy, for its 150th, erected a mission bell in downtown Gilroy. The tribe tried to mobilize to prevent it, but people on the Gilroy Arts Commission were just really committed to putting up this bell, which is really unfortunate. So there's on the removethebells.org, there's a petition that organizers are trying to circulate to send to the governor and the California legislature to pass legislation to remove the bells.
Thank you. I'm putting in the chat also, there was an Ohlone History Working Group report for Santa Clara University. So I know this is a little bit older at this point. Some things have changed, but I just want to put in the chat.
Something that I thought was really interesting, I don't know how, like if folks in the room or on Zoom know, is I think that there is, and of course I shut the tab because I was so annoyed. Yes, there's a land acknowledgement on Santa Clara's website that talks about the Muwekma Ohlone who trace their ancestry through the missions, and like, let's remember and acknowledge them. And I think it's like just so, I don't know, it's interesting and fraught that at the same time that you have a land acknowledgement, you're not teaching as an institution about the real history.
We have a question from the chat that's asking your experience, how effective have petitions really been in terms of persuading decision makers?
It's a really good and insightful question, especially when they're like online petitions of like clicktivism. Am I still sharing my screen? Okay, cool. So this is this is answering the question, I promise. This is another coalition that we are part of. This is there's a place in Fresno County on the way to Yosemite that is named Squaw Valley, which is a racist and misogynist slur. Communities have been trying to change, indigenous leaders in the area have been trying to change that name for generations. And this is Roman Raintree and his daughter who have kind of revived those efforts in recent years. And Roman couldn't get traction, like he just could not get the Board of Supervisors to like even listen, or even local people who weren't already aware of the issue to pay attention. And so he started a change.org petition, which now has like 38,000 signatories to it. The petition itself, the Board of Supervisors, like it doesn't care, right? Because they don't care because they don't care about the issue, but they also continue to say like, we don't care because those aren't our constituents, which means they're not responsive to them, but also there's no threat to their holding their board seat from those change.org signatures. And every time that this online petition hit another threshold, there was more media attention paid to the issue. And so over the course, especially of the last year, there was more and more media attention. It was in the Fresno Bee, which is actually like a pretty well circulated paper in the Central Valley, but also in the LA Times, the SF Chronicle, the Guardian, the Sierra Club magazine, and I believe National Geographic, and then the PBS NewsHour. And those are the kinds of things that make a lot of people pay a lot more attention. And now the ACLU, along with Restoring Justice for Indigenous Peoples, Alliance of Boys and Men for Color, and the Rename S Valley Coalition are working with 2 assembly members to run legislation in the state of California to get rid of the S word all across the state. So like, did the petition itself, you know, kind of persuade decision makers? I don't know specifically, but it certainly was really helpful in public education and in like building momentum towards change.
I'm gonna ask one more question, Tedde, and then I know you wanted to leave us time so that we could actually, if we wanted to, fill out the petition or write a letter of support. But I'm curious how you practice self-care as you're doing this work. As someone who is Navajo, I feel like this is, you know, it's pretty intense, and we really, I will say, I really appreciate you being here, because I think it can be very tough talking about these issues when you're impacted by them. So curious how you manage through that.
Yeah, thank you. It's a really good question. And the answer is like totally depends on the day. We were having this conversation actually with a group of interns at the ACLU, because we have an intern program. So if you're interested in interning, we're always taking interns. And a couple of us on staff here were just joking, and like joking, but like not joking, that sometimes like it's just okay to cry in work meetings, right? Like, as you said, like this stuff is sometimes really heavy and really hard. And so I say that kind of jokingly, but also like it's okay to be a human being in the work and like bring that with you and have that show up in the ways that it does. I think that being able to work alongside people like Chairman Lopez and people like Roman, and that the quote that's on the screen is like such a beautiful thing. And so that's one of the things that kind of just brings you through, is the ability to be able to do this work. And kind of from a more personal perspective, I think, you know, on days when it's really hard, that like if federal policy had been successful, like I wouldn't be here in the way that I am. And that is like, so it's such a privilege to then be able to do this work in honor of my ancestors, and in like hopes for future generations.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing.
So with that, I think we can go ahead and wrap it up. So I think we can have a huge visual or audio thank you to our speaker, Tedde.
Thank you.
Our co-sponsor organization is Native American Coalition for Change. I wonder if by in-person or visual, Alex, would you like to speak?
Yeah, sure. I would just thank you so much, Tedde, for speaking. That was super insightful. And it's sad that I haven't heard a lot about these topics earlier. And actually, I was thinking there was a comment about how Santa Clara holds so tightly to its church as its image. And I actually got this public health mask. And of course, there's a church on it. That was just a relative topic. But anyway, yeah, so I've been president of NAC for a while now. I joined my sophomore year, and I'm a senior now. And we were planning our second annual powwow a couple months into it, and then of course COVID hit. So we're finally revamping, and I'm pretty pleased to announce that we're having it again on April 30th. And so of course all of you are welcome. And we'd love to see you there.
Thank you. Awesome. Can you describe more like what the event is like for those of us that don't know what a powwow is?
Yeah, so it's a whole day event. We're starting at 10:30 and it's ending at around 8:30 p.m. And so through the course of that day, we're having a lot of dances and celebrations and traditional drumming and hopefully some food vendors that we're trying to work out still. But yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Sharing. Thank you to the people on the board that helped out with this event. And of course, if you are interested in joining our board next year, there's that. And with that, thank you so much. We have food and sandwiches for you.
Thank you.
Patty, do you want to say anything? I guess we can put the link in the chat for the to write a letter of support, or how would you?
Yeah, so the campaign is trying to get to 20,000 signatures on the online petition, and then they're going to print all of the names and take them to the Board of Supervisors, which actually is a pretty impressive stack of papers. And then also individual and institutional letters of support are kind of even more powerful, right? Because it shows that you took the time to write a letter and send it in. So I, of course, just lost it. Oh, here it is. So there was a statement of support sent in by a group of faculty and students from Santa Clara University. It's now 2 years old. So one idea would be to work with folks on that list to do a refresh and send it in, or to write ones from the Law Club or the Native American College Students for Change, and or just as individuals in the room to write a letter, especially as presumably residents of Santa Clara County, you are their constituents. So your voices really should matter. And there are kind of on the statements of support site, there are lots of letters that have already been submitted that you can use as templates and kind of just almost even copy paste them and then put in especially like why this issue matters to you and why you think Santa Clara should kind of be on the right side of history on this issue. And then also on the website is are all the email addresses of the Board of Supervisors. And then the coalition just asks that you also CC the coalition so they can track all of the support.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you for being here. And thanks for everyone joining us on Zoom, and to Romay for being our wonderful moderator. Thank you.
Thank you.